All right. Well, Davos is going on, and Dr. Anthony Fauci was talking about the end of the pandemic. He did say, and I sort of fell out of my chair today because he said things that seemed quite reasonable. He said that because Omicron is running through society like a wildfire, that could actually mean that the pandemic will become the endemic. Something that's endemic means that it has a constant presence in a population, but it does not affect anyone at an alarming rate.
The flu is endemic.
The flu is endemic.
Common
Absolutely
cold.
right.
Common cold.
Right. And he says, yes.
Hump day.
This is what
Chicken
the hump
pox.
day is.
Yeah, chicken pox are endemic. You're never going to get rid of it, right?
You're right. Absolutely correct. Yeah. You guys want to keep going?
No,
Is
no.
Athlete's foot.
Athlete.
Muppets.
Can you? Yeah, let's name all of these ailments. Anybody?
The
you
Muppets
can-
are endemic.
They are. Let us know in the chat if you can name another endemic. The common cold, everything else. But he's now saying that this is that we
Right.
are. This is what we've been saying. By the way, if we would have said this 5 months ago, we would have been labeled a conspiracy theorist.
We did say it in November. I remember saying in November when the news came out that Omicron was light and that it was very contagious. And I said, could it be a good thing then? Then we all get it and it's not that big of a deal. And I felt really terrified to say that. I don't anymore because now Anthony Fauci is saying it loud and clear.
Here's what he
Now,
had
I
to
wonder
say
if I
on
should
this.
reach out to those friends and see if I can get them back.
No, you're not going to be able to get them back. But maybe you'll get Dr. Fauci back.
You can say,
here
hey,
he
it's
is.
a new year. You can apologize to me. I'm accepting apologies.
I'm accepting apologies for this week only.
So here's what he had to say. Let's take a listen.
It's not going to be that you're going to eliminate this disease completely. We're not going to do that. But hopefully it will be at such a low level that it doesn't disrupt our normal social, economic, and other interactions with each other. I hope the new normal also includes a real strong corporate memory of what pandemics can do. So we don't just go on when we get this under control, forgetting how we have to do better in both the scientific preparedness, the public health preparedness, and the public health response.
So he's saying, okay, now it's time to start to think about what we've learned, right? Barring any new variant that is worse and more deadly to the tune of Delta or worse.
Yeah, he also had more to say on this issue, and he basically talking about masks, and he doesn't think that we're gonna have to live with masks. What is it gonna look? What is going to be the new normal? He was asked that question. Here's his response on a couple of other issues.
The possibility of pandemics. I don't think people are going to be walking around with masks all the time. I mean, I think that that's very much out of the question. That's not going to be something that the world will accept as being normal.
Yeah, you think so? Like walking around with masks for the rest of our lives? No, thank you. He also had this to say about one more point. Returning to normal life.
Highly sensitive. In fact, in some respects can be a bit misleading because you could recover from the acute phase and not have replication competent virus. And since the PCR doesn't tell you whether it's replication competent, it tells you have nucleotide fragments there. On the other side of the coin, the antigen tests are less sensitive if you give just one. But if you can do it in a sequential way, they become cumulatively as sensitive as a PCR. But there are a considerable numbers of false negatives when you have a less sensitive antigen test. So you have two ends of the spectrum.
All right, so let's unpack that a little bit. So living with taking tests on a regular basis.
Yes.
Maybe not walking around with masks nonstop. Maybe.
Right.
Okay. And false positives from these tests and false negatives as well. So, these companies that are going to set about to say, hey, you're going to have to either get a vaccine or we're going to have these routine tests. Well, we know he's acknowledging that these things are not horribly accurate. So that's going to become our new normal, is relying on these inaccurate tests, or maybe having masks, maybe not for a long time.
Right. And so
Well,
it's
I think-
interesting. Please go ahead.
Go ahead. Well, I was just going to say it's also interesting that like now he's under pressure from Congress and all this other stuff, and now he's starting to say the things that people have been saying since the beginning. People have been saying what he's saying now.
Right, and exactly that's what I said earlier, which is like, hey, 5 months ago, if we would have said any of these things, we probably would have been kicked off YouTube. In fact, we were for a week because we talked about the exact same things that he is now saying. And it's interesting, though, because you have this sort of flip-flopping right now. Right on the one hand, you've got Dr. Fauci saying this about an endemic, and then you have the WHO coming out and saying almost the exact opposite, saying that, in fact, no, we've got a long way to go, and this could actually be, we could have seen another 50 to 100,000 deaths in short order. I mean, think about what the WHO is saying.
Yeah, well, it's interesting now because we're going to see people start to realize they want to be a part of one government or another, right? So, for instance, in Spain last week, the prime minister said, we're going to look into moving into an endemic phase because we can't live like this any longer. And other European Union countries are saying, no, we do not want to do anything of the sort. France and Germany want to lock down any unvaccinated people. And so we'll see a division inside of the European Union the same way we have seen a division within states. And people will start to choose, I want to be a part of this culture or another based on what they believe. It's a bit of a scary way to think about how you choose where to live based on what your rights are. But this is now what we're faced with. I mean, just alone in Portugal, right, where we live, we saw from this week last year, the infection rate is up 286%, but the death rate is down 82%. So out of 33,000 cases, only 24 deaths, whereas last year when there were 8,700 cases, there was 130. And that is, in fact, a death and infection rate like the flu, right? It is more infectious, but about as deadly, on par, right? And so this is something that people don't, people get so mad when you say it's like the flu, right? But if we get there, will we be allowed to say so?
Who gets so mad? By the way, I'm curious, like, who is they?
Twitter.
It's Twitter that gets mad. Who is they that gets mad that it's like the flu? Especially Omicron, which is actually less severe than the flu. I've had the flu. I've been on my ass for 2 weeks with the flu. Have you? Have you ever had the flu where you've just been knocked out for a number of weeks?
Again, cold and flu is a throwaway term. They are the same.
Okay.
So yes, I have had that. But Clayton's actually had pneumonia, and that's
the best.
Thing,
I will
right?
say the best thing about pneumonia is I lost like 15 pounds.
Yes, and you didn't have to watch the kids.
Right.
They were really tiny at the time, and I was so mad because I got no help from it.
I was just
I was
on
You're
the
just
couch.
trying to get away.
Man,
get
I'd
out
be
of
getting
helping the
pneumonia
baby.
every month.
Yeah. I know. Like, there's somebody I know who gets pneumonia once a year.
Well, people get prone to pneumonia. Absolutely. That's true.
But I mean, I think this is interesting when you have the WHO coming out and saying this about, that this is nowhere near done. I mean, so the WHO saying one thing, Dr. Fauci saying another. I think it's so hilarious to have him say that, we've learned a lot. We need to remember, right? In this soundbite where he says, we need to remember. I hope corporations will remember everything in the scientific community will remember what we've learned. Oh yeah, I remember at the beginning where the WHO and you, Dr. Fauci, were telling us that this was not human to human transmissible, that you did not need to wear a mask.
Yes.
That it did nothing to help.
Or
right?
that the vaccines would stop the spread. And now the CDC is saying this morning that healthy children do not need a booster shot. Like, we should not we can vaccinate anyone who wants a booster, second, third, fourth, whatever. You can show up, get whatever you want, right?
Right.
But for children, we
shouldn't
absolutely
even have been pushing them to get the first ones.
The first
kids.
Vaccine for children.
Yeah, kids. Yeah. Because there's no scientific proof whatsoever that the corona was worse for them than that.
Well, that absolutely was my experience with my 3 children having COVID. And I am inclined to agree with you about that. But now they're saying we don't need to boost children. Let's just not even do that.
Well, you know what really frustrates me is that from the very beginning of this, like I was following some pretty prominent scientists and doctors that were actually in the field gathering data. And these people have been demonized and marginalized and blocked from Twitter, and Joe Rogan, they're trying to cancel Joe Rogan because two of the doctors were on there. And the thing is, like, if you look at all that they've been saying, they've been right the whole time. And now it's come full circle, and nobody's going to apologize to them. Nobody's going to re-platform them. But Dr. Fauci, he's been all over the place. He's lied and everything. And he's getting paid $460,000 a year of our money, more than the president. And he's been wrong every step of the way. So it's like, what? Like, now what? So what do we do? Are we going to course correct and apologize to these doctors and say, hey, we should have been listening to you all along? Now we've got preventative treatment. Let's look into the prevention. Let's look into
that's interesting.
the early treatment.
And maybe we'll start listening to doctors now. I mean, I don't know. Maybe we'll start paying attention to some of these doctors. I mean, there's doctors coming out today talking about the like changes to the body as a result of the vaccine. We're talking about neurological things as it relates to this from MIT scientists. Or we're also talking about an Israeli vaccine chief out of Israel who's admitting mistakes today and saying we made some mistakes about this. Professor Cyril Cohen talked about herd immunity, and also about his pandemic regrets on the Unheard podcast, or the Unheard show. And I thought this was a really interesting interview. He admits basically, hey, vaccine passports, we have to rethink this. The green pass, the vaccine passport, that concept is no longer relevant. In this Omicron era, we should phase it out. It was a mistake. We shouldn't have to be showing this green pass to be able to do anything in life. Listen to what he had to say about this.
Policies hasn't yet caught up with the reality, because Israel was also famous for being one of the first countries to introduce a green pass or a vaccine pass, which presumably the principle of it is that you can feel safe in a room full of vaccinated people if it prevents transmission. In a world where it doesn't prevent transmission very much or at all, vaccine passports are not really very relevant. Has Israel caught up with that fact?
Oh yeah, definitely. It's not only myself saying that in the medias, for the past few months, but other people, especially with the Omicron, where we don't see virtually any difference. There's a very narrow gap between people vaccinated and non-vaccinated. Both can get infected with the virus more or less at the same pace. But I want to tell you, there is another side to what we call the green pass. If you take two rooms, one that is full of people that are vaccinated and one full of people that are not vaccinated, and you introduce a virus, the impact at the end of the day on the healthcare system of the propagation of a virus in a vaccinated population or vaccinated room is less, because the vaccine can prevent severe disease.
But it's just a very different point, isn't it? That's about the impacts on
consequences.
Yeah, but Are you now of the view that vaccine passports should be got rid of, phased out, because they're no longer relevant in the Omicron era?
I tend to think so, and that's also something else. This is we have to look at the future. We need better vaccines to prevent transmission. I mean, I'm all for a nasal vaccine, for example, that would be able to better mimic the immunity that we get from the disease. And we know, even if the Omicron actually is causing a lot of, not breakthrough infection, but reinfections, people that were vaccinated and, secondary infections, et cetera, we have to take into account that still the virus is better at immunizing than the vaccine. But
really interesting, right? I mean,
yes.
Okay, getting the actual virus is better at immunizing us. We need to have better vaccines than we currently have.
Natural immunity.
And so what he's saying here is that the cost of being unvaccinated is harder on hospitals, right? Because it will mean that people get sicker, perhaps, from exposure to the virus. But the outcome is virtually the same. So then why do we punish unvaccinated people? Because they tax infrastructure. Not because they hurt other people. They don't hurt other people any more than the vaccinated. It's because they think they're taxing, that they break their social contract because they'll tax the hospitals.
that narration changed all along, because remember it was 2 weeks to flatten the curve, and the jab was going to get us out of this.
Right.
And then it became to where the argument was, well, you're gonna die if you don't get it. So it's like, okay, well, that's my choice. Well, when that argument fell apart, then it became, well, you're going to overwhelm the hospitals. So
Right.
the goalpost just kept getting moved on the not the anti-vax, but the non-vaccinated, because the narrative kept falling apart, because it doesn't make any sense. Because if you're going to tax people for overwhelming the medical system, then like we said here, then where does it stop? You need to start with people with heart disease that are eating McDonald's, or you go out and you're
Yes.
rock climbing and you fall. Like the medical system is overwhelmed because they've been actively getting rid of hospital beds for years.
Now, Chris's top level media in our chat says, Clayton, my question is, have you talked to any hospitals lately? Because I know nurses, and what I hear over here in the States is that they're having to send people to other hospitals. And I've been hearing that as well. Now, I called a number of hospitals during the Delta outbreak to see what the story was. And I spoke to a number of the charge nurses at these different hospitals, and they were overwhelmed. They didn't have ICU beds. They had one left, or they had none left, and they were having to divert resources to other hospitals. So I can't speak to that today. I haven't personally made any phone calls in the past few weeks to these different hospitals.
We don't know how much of that is people that think they're dying because there was such fear around the pandemic, right? Like everybody's going to the hospital because, oh my gosh, I think I might have it. So,
Yes.
There's an overwhelm there too. And then it's like they're also giving us misinformation by saying people died with COVID versus people died of COVID. Like the numbers were of that we were seeing on a daily basis were people who died with it as well as of it. So
Yes.
the numbers have been skewed all along.
So the hospitalization rates overall are down.
Hold on. Karen says, this show is just becoming another conspiracy theory site. I'm out. Karen, what can you be specific? Is it something?
Well,
I mean, what?
She's been just not fun all along. So
Oh, okay.
she won't engage in.
Oh, she doesn't
intelligent
care about
conversation.
facts.
I've tried.
All right. So facts.
Yeah.
Okay.
Not
I know.
fun.
No, facts are more important than emotions. I know. And some
Yeah.
people are just they don't want to hear facts. They'll just rather hear, emotions.
Yeah, they
That's
just
fine.
want to
Even
praise
with the facts,
people.
are we having fun?
No, I mean, I think it's important to, unpack the facts. I
Yeah.
mean, to hear Dr. Fauci talk about shifting this to, moving out of a pandemic phase into an endemic, and to live now with this. That's something we've been saying on the show, at least the Omicron phase, for months now. Mm-hmm. And, you weren't allowed to talk about that. You weren't allowed to even say that. Even The Atlantic wrote a piece specifically about when do we move? We're going to be living with this forever. It's just never, we will hit endemic phase when the number of cases is just not even reportable. And that's what the administration is now moving towards. And the administration moving away from these daily COVID numbers and moving away from that, I think that's going to be in large part to try to maybe help President Biden also. I think moving away from this daily case numbers and the problems with COVID, you might start to see this administration shift its policies and shift its strategy away from talking about daily case numbers.
In fact, that's happened. Now, the January 6th HHS guidelines now say that they will retire certain fields of their daily reporting that no longer need to be reported, among which is previous days COVID deaths. So they are no longer going to be requiring that of all hospitals. Why? Right. And so some people are upset about it because they think that, they're keeping information from us. And some people might think, well, those numbers were problematic because, as David said, some of them may have been actual COVID deaths and some of them may have been deaths of people who were also affected with COVID. So who knows at this point? Do we need that? And does it actually contribute to a paranoia? It's an important question to ask because absolutely when we were sick with COVID and Clayton got to the 8th day without his temperature going down, even though he could breathe just fine. Thankfully, we used the oxygen monitor on the new Apple Watch. The most recent versions have O2 monitors. And he never dipped below a percentage of oxygen that scared me. But I still felt like, you've been sick for so long. Do I need to take you in? Because you're scared. Because it's scary to hear COVID. It's scary to hear someone say you have it. And it's scary to feel like, maybe I'm doing something wrong.
Yeah. And look, to be honest, I mean, and we know we've had friends who've died of COVID. So this is not something to take lightly. But as we move into this Omicron phase, is this the thing that's going to, we were hoping was going to be the thing that would get us out of this?
And would we
lockdown.
feel better then? You know, I mean, we did a teleconference with your doctor and she was like, yeah, that's what this does. You're all right. Stay right there. You're going to get better. She didn't show any, you know, so can we all sort of adopt her? There's a fly in here. Casual maneuver. Sorry, I'm maneuvering against the fly. Can you please give me the chopsticks?